Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Optics in Action. I am super excited today to have with us Alex Dawson. He is a software product manager, and he actually helped us at EPS with the optics program, the optics system that we created or redid later last year. So I'm excited to have you, Alex, and excited to hear some of the insights you might have to share with us today.
Awesome. It's great to be here, Ryan. I'm really excited to chat and just talk a little bit about how a software product manager thinks about things.
That's awesome. As you know, we talk a lot about people and process, and software product managers have to walk that line almost every day. But before we get into the what a software product manager is and how you helped us and how some of this stuff works together, why do you do it? Like, why are you passionate about this? Why is this interesting to you? Why did you get into it? Those types of things.
Well, it's a great question to ask. It's kind of a funny story for me. So my dad has been a software engineer for decades. And, when I was a little kid, he actually raised me to be a Java developer. So at a very young age, he had me on a computer writing code, playing around with things and trying to build software. And, we had a little application where you could, build games or build little applications. And so me and my brother, we would create little games, and we ended up creating a website and put our games on there and had a whole thing, and we just loved creating software. But the part for me that I always really loved was trying to figure out what made people tick, what people would like, and really building something that people would enjoy and that they could get value out of. So I always kind of, I multiple versions of our little website that I think, all of 10 people came to, which, 5 of those were my mom, but, just different versions of that site, trying to be like, what do I like better? What's a better experience? What are people going to use that's going to show them, what we're all about? Our little game making group here. So
That's
to me, that
awesome.
was what really resonated about software. Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's awesome. I love hearing that sort of the childhood experience and looking up to your father and kind of all of that leading you to where you are today. And I think as we explore the purpose that people have often, it's interesting to hear where some of that was grounded and how it evolved to where it is today. So that's really cool. So tell us a little bit about what a software product manager is. Because when I first got to know you and we sort of started talking about that, and I was like, well, we're redeveloping optics and optics 2.0. What might this look like? And so tell us our audience a little bit what a software product uh, manager is.
Yeah, absolutely. So at a really simple level, a software product manager is someone who is in charge of really the business outcomes of a piece of software. So it's really easy to think of software as like, oh, I just want it to do X, Y, Z, or oh, we're going to have to spend a bunch of money on it. I don't want to think about it. But it's really important whenever you're about to build software or buy software that you think through exactly who is going to use it and what they're going to use it for and how that's going to help your business. And so a software product manager is someone who balances those things to make good decisions about what to build with the software so that the software you build or the software you buy or the software you use is going to make the biggest impact on your business, and then is accountable to those metrics that you're measuring that with.
Yeah, yeah. I know, like, when we had our first version of my software platform, I had no idea how anybody was going to use it. I had thoughts, I had ideas, but I was like, let's just put a beta test out there, kind of see, does this make sense? And we started getting users and we started getting people like interacting with it, and it started evolving in a different direction than I originally thought. So like version 1.0 was very different from what version 2.0 ended up being. And I think a lot of the questions you started asking me, and in your world, I think you call it a user story map. Did I get it right this time?
You got it. You got it.
So tell us a little bit
Yeah.
about
So
a
there's
user
yeah.
story map, what that is, right?
Yeah, so there's a number of tools that someone who's trying to make decisions with software can use to help them understand more about their users and about the business goals around the software. And a user story map is one of my favorites. And really, in a simple term, it lays out sort of what a given user is trying to do with a piece of software. Not specific at, like, it's not like click, I want, as a user, I want to click a button. It's not that. It's, as a user, I want a business outcome. As a user, I want to document my processes. As a user, I want to extract a PDF so that I can report on something, right? Like, it's understanding what a user is actually trying to do and then putting it in a format really end to end to help you understand what is that user going to do sort of over the life of them using that piece of software. So it's really just putting to graphical form something that people might have a hard time capturing all in their head at once. And it allows you to have conversations about, what is the next step after this? Is there a next step? Do we know what it is? What happens before a user does this? Or what's more important? This action that a user takes or this action? Because all of those are questions and decisions that you have to make when you're designing a piece of software.
Right, right. Yeah, I know that first of all, when you sat down with me and we started mapping some of those ideas, started getting some concepts, kind of getting on the same page of, it's really about business outcomes and what does this look like for the business, for my business, as well as for my clients. That started really helping me refine my thought process. And then when you took it that next step further of meeting with my software development team, and it really provided a common language for me as a business owner, the software development team, who I was trying to communicate to in my own words, and you playing that intermediary role to give us a common language and help us walk through kind of what are the intentions of this and where are we going with this. So I know that was incredibly helpful for our team. And we call it something different, but that user story map that you created helped to bridge that gap in communication that was existing there. So and with a common language of thinking about the customer or the user's experience. So that's really cool. What are some of the other tools? So you said there's kind of some other tools that you might use along the way in addition to the user story map. What are some of those other tools or ways that you communicate with the business people and the developers to make that link?
Oh, yeah, there's a lot of them, but another key one would be something called a roadmap. Software is a little bit different than other types of things that you have to build, right? If you're building a house, you might have a project plan for, when you're gonna lay the foundation, when you're gonna frame out the walls, when you're gonna do the plumbing, and so on and so forth. And then at a certain point, you're done. The house is done, and anybody who's owned a house can tell you that it's never really done, but at a certain point for the builder, it's done. And software is a little bit different. When you build a piece of software, it's not so clear cut sometimes when exactly you're done, because there's always something more you can do. There's always some more way you can add additional value. And you see that, in a lot of times when you have apps on your phone or you go to a certain website or whatever, that website's always changing. It's always updating. There's always new technologies that can allow you to do new things. So when we talk about a roadmap, businesses can sometimes have roadmaps for what they want to do strategically with their business. But for a piece of software, when you're talking about a roadmap, it's saying, this is how we see our business strategy going and how this piece of software is going to help. But then here are the things, here are the highest priorities for what we're going to implement. And what this allows you to do is have a real conversation with your business and say, what is our strategy? Where are we going to play? How are we going to win? And what do we need our software to do in order to help us accomplish that? And on the other hand, it allows your engineering folks, your architects, whoever you're working with, to understand, hey, this is what we're working on next. And start thinking about, these are the technologies that we might need to develop. And it also allows you to give more visibility to your technical folks in terms of where the business is going. Because a lot of times, what I've seen in my career is you never really know where somebody might have a really great insight or a really great idea. And sometimes it's the engineers that are building your software that can really just ask the right question at the right time or make the right comment that just helps solidify, oh, wow, because you said that, now I have a better understanding of what I want this to do or what I think our users need to accomplish with it. So I think a roadmap's a great tool.
Yeah. And I know that, as we finished up Optics 2.0 and got that software working and functioning the way that the user story map was created, then we started looking at what are those next things. And one of the challenges that I've always struggled with is that I don't want my software platform to become a Frankenstein. And so I think those two tools that you just outlined, the one being the user story map, how are users going to use it today? And then a roadmap of what additional functionality are you going to add in that's going to strategically meet some objective, while at the same time not turning the user story, the user experience into a Frankenstein. Because I think that's a real fear. It should be a real fear for anybody who's managing software, developing software, building software to solve a problem. How do you make that? So, what are some of the things in your experience when you think about that balance of technically we could do virtually anything, right? Software can do lots of things. How do you navigate that with people to make sure that you're lining up and not creating Frankenstein?
Absolutely. And, there's the kind of going back to the house analogy. It's kind of similar to, let's say you built a house and you started adding an addition on. Well, now you need, is it a bathroom? Well, now you need to add plumbing, right? Is it, you need to make your breaker box for your electrical bigger. Now you need to, make sure that you get the right permits and that the foundation is going to, all of these different things that you think about every time you make your house, bigger or different. That concepts still kind of apply to software. And with a little twist, when you're building on the software, there's this concept of maintenance where you have to, continue to update different things about software to keep it up to date and make sure that it's running accurately and correctly. And when you build it bigger, it's harder to maintain. It just is. And even if you're building on good things and good features, there's a cost to that sometimes is unexpected, and sometimes unexpected how high that cost really is. When you go to build in my career, we went to add a feature onto a tool, and we literally came to a standstill because the amount of code that already existed, it was so complicated and so intertwined with business logic that we couldn't add anything additional onto it. So this is why I really always like to draw people back to that user story map to really get a sense of, here's the scope, here's how, here's everything that our tool can do, here's everything that our piece of software can do, here's our aspirations. But then making sure that story map is also backed up with software engineering rigor, so that it's understood to say, okay, here's where we're going, right? We have a direction, we know what things that we want to do, here's what we have, but let's be thinking through mindfully how we're going to add things so that we can scale our code base, so we can scale our user base, so we can add additional functionality to add more value, right? So to me, it's all very entwined. And in order to do it well, you have to communicate, and you have to make sure that you're keeping those artifacts in front of your face so that you can make those decisions well.
Yeah, that makes sense. So one of the things that, like, I imagine with most software that as that first version gets created, or maybe the second version, it gets put out for beta testing, there's some evolution that happens in the product owner's mind, right? Like all of a sudden, this happened for us, for example, with all of a sudden we had a client that's like, wait, could we do AI readiness assessment and adoption assessment? And what would that look like? So the software platform that we created, it turns out it's actually the 5 steps we take people through is actually a really powerful way for folks to look at their processes and systems and answer some questions about where AI integration or where work can be streamlined through that system. So as product owners kind of come up with these new ideas that they're adding on, right? And they're like, well, the software could also do this. How do you navigate that with people, right? People are often more difficult to deal with than software, than technology. Like, how do you deal with people who suddenly have these changing, evolving ideas about what they want or how they envision things working?
I've always loved the analogy of the blind men and the elephant, where there was an elephant and blind men came up to it and felt a different part of the elephant, and then they described what they touched. And one blind man felt the elephant's tail and said, "Oh, an elephant is like a snake. It's all thin." And one blind man touched the elephant's legs and went, "Wow, it's like a tree. It's so sturdy." And another blind man felt its tusks, and said, "Wow, elephant's really sharp." And all of them were only able to kind of touch the part that that they could with their hands, and they all had a slightly different take on it, even though they're all touching the same thing. And I think software is kind of a similar thing. And you really, in order to, it's easy to say like, go build a button that prints, right? I'm going to go print this, but all of the questions that come off of that and what people hear when you say that can vary significantly. One person can say, I only ever wanted to print black and white. Another person might say, I wanted to print in color. Another person say, well, I want to be able to pick, right? Like you can have different interpretations. And that's why it's so important to make sure, A, that you know what your objectives are. What are you trying to do for your business? And then how are you going to, and if that's going to make a big difference for you. And then B, when you're building that software, whether it's an AI pipeline, which, considerations with AI, or what are you training your model on? Where are you going to integrate it? Who's going to be the primary user, and who are you trying to replace, right? Like these are different questions that you can ask around that, and different people are going to have a different idea of what that is. So you really have to bring that together and make it visible. But then you also have to, back that up with, this is our hypothesis, because you can't actually know exactly what is going to happen, but you have to say, this is our strongest hypothesis, and really try to figure out, how do I validate whether or not that hypothesis is a good one before you start, overcommitting resources to doing something.
Yeah, I think this is so critical. And as you were talking, I was just sort of thinking about the evolution that we went through, and the evolution of the software that we're using and we've built and clients are using, and the steps that happen along the way of the first version of this. Like literally we had like a rocket ship where people would click the different parts of the rocket ship, and the reality was it was kind of cool and interesting, but it didn't give people the experience that they needed to be efficient and effective at doing their job. And so the user story map that you helped our team create really flipped that around to where there's very few clicks that a person needs to take to get where they need to go, to do the things that they actually get value from in the software. And I think that's a really important piece that was eye-opening to me, as bringing you in as an outsider, looking at it, assessing it, flipping it around, saying, what does the user really need from this?
Yeah, and ultimately, right, that's kind of the goal, right? When we're building software, or considering buying software, it's a similar thought process. And I think a key piece too is when you bring something like that together, you start to identify the assumptions that you're making about what a user wants to see. And there are ways of validating an assumption without building software, or buying software in order to determine if your assumption is true, right? And it can be something really simple. I've even used a spreadsheet before. Like, hey, if you saw this data on the screen, what would you expect to happen next? Or, would you want to see A or B option? Doing different things where you can start validating, what the ideal is for the user. That just really helps you understand more about how users think, about what kinds of, jobs they're using your software to do. And so I just think when you bring all that together, that's what can really help you build something extraordinary.
Yeah. And I think you said something that sort of triggered in my mind. I've often thought about technology, and this is true about software and AI and even mechanical technology, right? Technology is most valuable when it enables people to do something more efficiently or more effectively. And I think that's true about all technology. And so as we are now doing these AI readiness assessments and adoption assessments, it's not about, all right, where can ChatGPT help your business, right? Like that's one way to come at the problem. The way that optics and the way that this user story that we've created helps is we first come through and say, what does your journey look like? What does your customer's journey look like? What are the pain points and the handoffs in your process and your system? And then we look at, where could AI enable you to do that more efficiently, more effectively? And I think when we're asking those questions, that how can technology enable your team to do something more efficiently, more effectively, to fulfill some purpose? When we start with that question, everything else starts to lay out in a logical sequence. If we start by saying, I've got this cool technology, let's go use it, it's a really, really hard way to integrate it into a system. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I think it's really easy to fall in love with a particular solution, right? Without really stopping to think, is this actually solving a problem for me? And especially with technology, there's just something about it that's it's so cool and new. And, you see other people using it and they're getting value out of it. And it's really easy to say, oh, well, I need to use it so I can get value out of it too, without stopping to ask yourself that exact question. It's why I'm a big fan of the optic system. Why I was super excited to work with you on everything was just seeing kind of, hey, pause, think about this. What's the purpose? Who's going to be involved? What are the processes around it? And those types of questions are exactly what you need to ask in order to make good decisions around it. You might find that it's kind of unexpected the way you come out with. There might be a use case that you thought was a peripheral use case that's actually a core use case, or vice versa, right? And so it's really important to kind of do those assessments and do the work, do the thinking, and pause before you go committing to it. But I do think that the optic system is perfectly set up to really do good thinking about software.
Awesome. Well, with that, Alex, I sincerely appreciate you being on this episode of Optics in Action to talk a little about being a software product manager, what that means, what that looks like, and sharing a little bit how you helped our team to evolve the platform to where it is. And I know that people probably got some great insights from this, might even have some questions for you as they listen to this. What's the best way for folks to get in contact with you or to learn more?
Yeah, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm at Alexander Dawson on LinkedIn. Just search for me, or I think you might link to me too, which would be helpful, which would be great. But yeah, connect with me on LinkedIn. Shoot me a message. Would love to chat.
Fantastic. Thank you again, Alex, for being on this episode of Optics in Action.
Thanks a lot, Ryan. Thanks for having me on.